What if that sluggish brain fog you're feeling right now isn't actually just some inevitable symptom of getting older? Like, what if it's literally a physical traffic jam in your brain's cellular highway?
Which is such a wild concept, because we talk about cognitive decline like it's just this foregone conclusion.
Right. I mean, for a long time, the common wisdom was basically that we're born with a set amount of mental currency, right? And every year you just slowly spend it until the account is totally empty.
Yeah, we just assumed our memories and our focus, they just faded. Which is honestly a remarkably bleak way to view human biology.
It really is.
It paints this picture of our brains as these fragile sort of static objects that can only degrade. But the microscopic reality is entirely the opposite.
And that biological reality is exactly what we're exploring today. So we've got our hands on this incredibly detailed clinical text. It's called Poor Memory, Enhancing Focus with Neuroplasticity Routines.
It's a fantastic read. Really paradigm-shifting stuff in there.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically act as your shortcut to an upgraded brain. We're going to look at the underlying mechanics of how to eliminate brain fog and build just like unshakable focus.
And we're talking zero-cost routines here.
Yeah.
All entirely rooted in cellular biology.
Exactly. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information you process every day, or if you feel like your memory is quietly slipping away, this is for you. These insights are going to fundamentally change how you treat your own mind.
I mean, they really should.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we first have to unlearn a medical myth that, well, most of us probably internalized back in grade school.
We do. Before we even get to the actionable routines, we got to dismantle this outdated mainstream consensus about cognitive health.
The idea that we're hardwired, right?
Yeah, exactly. For the better part of the 20th century, the prevailing medical belief was that humans are born with a finite, hard-coded number of neurons.
It's like a set number of building blocks.
Right. And the assumption was that once you reach a certain point in adulthood, your neural architecture is basically locked in place. The networks you have are the ones you get.
And if you damage them, that's it.
Yeah, any damage or even just natural aging meant a permanent loss of function.
So it's basically the scientific equivalent of you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Precisely. It was a very deterministic, kind of depressing view. But then modern functional imaging came along and completely demolished that belief.
Thank goodness.
Seriously. The text focuses heavily on the biological reality that replaced it, which is neuroplasticity.
Right, which is just an incredible mechanism.
It is. It's the inherent lifelong ability of your central nervous system to physically reorganize its structure, its internal function, its neural connections, all based entirely on the stimuli you expose it to.
So every time you engage in deep work or, navigate a new environment, you're physically changing the shape of your brain.
You are literally reshaping the tissue.
The text goes into microscopic detail on how this happens, and it's way more mechanical than just this vague concept of learning. There are basically two specific biological mechanisms doing the heavy lifting here.
Yes. The first one is synaptic plasticity.
Right.
To visualize this, you kind of have to picture the communication between neurons. When you try to retrieve a memory or focus on a difficult concept, an electrical impulse travels down the long arm of a neuron.
Which is called the axon.
Exactly, the axon. And when that signal reaches the end of the line, it triggers the release of chemical neurotransmitters into this microscopic gap called the synaptic cleft.
And those chemicals cross the gap and bind to the neighboring neuron.
Right. And with repeated activation of that specific pathway, the brain signals the release of this very specific protein called Brain-Derived Neurotrophic Factor, or BDNF.
And the text refers to BDNF as biological fertilizer, which I love.
It's an incredibly apt description, honestly.
Yeah.
BDNF stimulates the physical growth of new dendritic spines.
Like little branches.
Yeah, they're tiny protrusions that act like signal receivers on the neuron. By sprouting more of these receivers, the connection between those two neurons becomes highly efficient. The signal travels way faster and with far less effort.
Wow. And then we have the second mechanism, which is adult neurogenesis.
Which is just wild to think about.
Right. It's the literal birth of brand new neurons. And this primarily happens in a region called the dentate gyrus, which is inside the hippocampus.
The heavy-duty learning and memory center of the brain.
Exactly. You are actively birthing new cells to handle new information. And the text uses a metaphor to tie these two mechanisms together that I just think is perfect.
The metropolis metaphor.
Yes. It suggests we stop thinking of the brain as a static computer hard drive and instead visualize it as a dynamic physical metropolis.
It totally changes the paradigm. In this metropolis, your memories, the names of your colleagues, the skills you're trying to master, those are all remote physical destinations.
Right, way out in the suburbs.
Exactly. And when you encounter a new piece of information for the first time, the path to that destination is nothing but a faint, unpaved dirt trail in the woods.
And if you only travel down that dirt trail once, the surrounding jungle just overgrows it.
The path completely vanishes.
And the next time you're in a meeting trying to recall that specific data point, you experience that very real, very frustrating sensation of forgetting.
But when you apply intense focus and repeatedly recall that info, you're essentially dispatching a cellular construction crew to that dirt path. And BDNF acts as the foreman of that crew.
So with repeated firing, the crew paves the dirt trail into a solid asphalt road.
I'm engaging with it, and that road is upgraded into a multi-lane, high-speed, illuminated expressway. The signals can travel to that destination instantly, with zero friction. That is what mastery physically looks like in your brain.
Okay, I have to push back here a little bit on behalf of anyone listening who feels like their focus is just completely shattered right now.
Fair enough.
Because if our biology is this adaptable, and we have these incredible biological construction crews waiting to build expressways, why does brain fog feel so insurmountable? Like, when I'm incredibly stressed or haven't slept, it doesn't feel like I'm wandering down a dirt path.
What does it feel like?
It feels like the city's entire power grid is just totally fried.
That's a great point. And your subjective feeling of a failing power grid maps perfectly to the cellular reality.
Really?
Yeah. When your body experiences chronic stress, sleep deprivation, or severe metabolic dysfunction, your system shifts entirely into survival mode.
So it's triaging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The biological priority becomes immediate preservation, not long-term structural growth. Consequently, the production of those new neurons in the hippocampus plummets. Furthermore, the release of BDNF is severely inhibited.
Meaning the foreman of the construction crew is basically put on indefinite unpaid leave?
The crew halts all work. So even if the neural expressways have been built, the chemical infrastructure required to send signals down those roads is completed.
Oh, wow. Metabolic waste builds up and neurotransmitters are scarce. Brain fog is a literal breakdown in the efficiency of cellular communication. The roads are there, but the traffic simply cannot move.
So this naturally leads us to the most important question. How do we get the foreman back on the job?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If BDNF is the crucial element for dispatching that crew and clearing the traffic jam, we need to know how to trigger its release on demand. And the text provides 3 distinct zero-cost protocols to do exactly that.
It does.
And Protocol 1 starts with a concept that goes against basically every natural instinct we have. It requires you to learn to love being remarkably bad at things.
Protocol 1 is the novel motor cognitive challenge, and its foundation lies in how our neurochemistry responds to the unfamiliar. The adult brain actually has a profound biological craving for novel, complex experiences.
So the actual routine requires you to engage in a totally novel, highly difficult physical or cognitive task for exactly 20 minutes every single morning.
And the crucial caveat here is that you must be terrible at it. Right. You could try juggling, or you could attempt to write out your morning to-do list with your non-dominant hand. Or try learning a complex chord progression on an instrument you've never played.
The purpose isn't to become a world-class juggler.
Right.
The purpose is purely chemical.
Right.
When you attempt to juggle and you drop the balls for the 20th consecutive time, you experience a very distinct, sharp sense of frustration.
Oh, yeah. I know that feeling well.
Right. And in our daily lives, we interpret that agitation as a signal that we should quit. Like, I'm bad at this, I'm done. But neurologically, that precise feeling of frustration is the trigger for a massive release of acetylcholine and dopamine.
So wait, that intense agitation you feel when your non-dominant hand can barely hold a pen.
Yeah.
That isn't a sign of failure at all. That frustration is the literal help wanted sign your brain hangs in the window to hire the BDNF construction crew.
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
Yes.
Acetylcholine functions like a chemical spotlight. It floods the specific neural circuits that are struggling with a task and says, pay close attention to these particular synapses.
And then what does the dopamine do?
Dopamine acts as the anchor. It signals to the broader nervous system that this novel experience is highly important and those pathways need to be preserved. So this specific cocktail of acetylcholine and dopamine chemically tags the circuits that the BDNF crew needs to reinforce.
I mean, I imagine dumping that kind of potent chemical cocktail into your brain at 7 in the morning has a massive ripple effect on the rest of your workday.
Oh, it absolutely does. By intentionally inducing that state of mild, frustrating challenge early in the day, you significantly elevate your baseline level of alertness. You're preloading your nervous system.
Wow.
So 3 hours later, when you sit down to execute a complex, cognitively demanding project, your brain is already saturated with the exact neurochemicals required to facilitate deep focus and learning.
Okay, so we've chemically primed the brain with morning novelty, but chemical priming is only half the battle if the physical structure of the brain is actively deteriorating. And here's where it gets really interesting. The text argues that a ubiquitous modern convenience is causing a very specific part of our brain to physically shrink.
Yeah, this is Protocol 2, which is focused entirely on spatial navigation deprivation.
Because we all rely on GPS. I mean, I know I am completely lost without that little blue dot on my phone telling me exactly when to turn.
Both of us are.
But outsourcing our spatial memory to algorithms is apparently causing the hippocampus, the actual tissue responsible for memory, and learning to weaken from chronic disuse. It really forces you to wonder, are our smartphones biologically breaking our ability to connect complex ideas?
The biological evidence leans heavily in that direction, unfortunately. To understand why, you have to look at the evolutionary function of spatial calculation.
Like how we used to navigate.
Exactly. For hundreds of thousands of years, the ability to mentally map a landscape, memorize the relationship between physical landmarks, and successfully navigate complex terrain without getting lost. That was quite literally a matter of survival.
You had to know where the water was.
Right. And the hippocampus evolved specifically to handle this immense multi-layered cognitive load.
So it's a biological system designed to process incredibly heavy data sets.
Yes. When you navigate physical space, your brain isn't just doing one thing. The hippocampus has to simultaneously integrate incoming visual data, access historical memory, calculate distance, and maintain an internal compass.
That's a lot of computing power.
It's a symphony of cognitive effort. And when you blindly follow audio prompts from a device, you strip away that demand entirely. You are essentially putting the hippocampus in a cast. And just like a muscle in a cast, the tissue begins to atrophy.
Wow. The protocol to counter this is beautifully simple, though I admit it's a bit intimidating.
It can be daunting, yeah.
Twice a week, you're instructed to travel to a new destination that's at least 30 minutes away. And before you get in the car or on your bike, you study a physical map.
A real map.
A real map. You memorize the street names, the sequence of the route, the major visual landmarks. Then, and this is the part that induces mild panic, you turn your phone completely off.
Totally off. No safety net.
You navigate the physical world using nothing but your biological memory.
And when you execute this protocol, you force the hippocampus to fire at an incredibly rapid rate. The immense mental effort required to continually orient yourself in physical space without a digital safety net stimulates a flood of BDNF.
You're demanding that your brain rebuild those spatial networks.
Exactly. We actually see this phenomenon clearly in neuroimaging studies of London taxi drivers.
Yeah.
Right? They spend years memorizing the chaotic layout of the city's streets, and their hippocampi are measurably larger and denser than the average population.
That's incredible. And the text makes a vital connection here. It points out that the brain does not have separate, isolated folders for reading physical maps and remembering what your boss said in a meeting.
No, it doesn't.
It utilizes the exact same biological hardware for both tasks.
That is the crucial insight here. The function of the hippocampus is generalized. Episodic memory, remembering events, conversations, and data, shares the identical tissue as spatial memory.
Oh, so by forcing your brain to map physical space, you are universally upgrading the hardware of the memory center.
Precisely. A hippocampus that is structurally robust enough to navigate across a city is structurally robust enough to effortlessly recall the details of a complex book.
Okay, let's look at where we are. We've embraced the chemistry of frustration by dropping juggling balls every morning. We are navigating across town using only our biological compass. We're putting in the intense conscious effort.
Right.
But the text reveals this massive biological twist. The actual physical rewiring of your brain, the literal paving of those neural expressways by the BDNF crew, does not occur while you are doing the hard work.
No, it doesn't. And this is perhaps the single most misunderstood aspect of neuroplasticity in human performance.
Because we culturally associate learning with active, intense effort.
Exactly. But the biological structural changes, the cementing of the new neural pathways only occur during periods of deep rest. Which brings us to Protocol 3. the 10-minute post-learning consolidation.
So the routine dictates that immediately following a 90-minute session of deep, intense cognitive focus, you must implement exactly 10 minutes of wakeful rest.
Wakeful rest, that's key.
You step away from the desk, close your eyes, sit in a quiet room, and do absolutely nothing. And the rules outlined here are remarkably strict, right?
Very strict.
No screens, no reading a book, no checking your inbox. You cannot even listen to a podcast or ambient music. It requires pure, unadulterated sensory deprivation.
And the biological mechanism that activates during this sensory deprivation is astonishing. When you completely remove all external stimuli, your brain automatically begins to replay the neural firing patterns of the complex information you were just focusing on.
Okay.
But it doesn't replay those patterns in real time. It actually fires those sequences at 20 times the normal speed.
Wait, 20 times the speed?
Yes, 20 times the speed.
That's insane. It's essentially fast-forwarding the tape of your own newly acquired knowledge.
Exactly. This rapid subconscious neural playback is the exact mechanism that cements short-term data into the cortex, transforming it into permanent structural knowledge.
So the BDNF construction crew is doing its absolute fastest, most efficient paving work while you're just sitting in a chair doing nothing at all?
Yes. The cortex and the hippocampus are rapidly communicating to solidify the new network.
Okay, I have to put on my hustle culture hat here for a second because I know what people are thinking.
Let's hear it.
The idea of sitting in the middle of a busy office, just staring at the back of our eyelids for 10 minutes while we have a massive to-do list, it feels wildly unproductive. We are conditioned to think of that as wasted time.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, most people would argue they can get the same rest by just unwinding for a few minutes, like scrolling through a social media feed or watching a quick YouTube video to decompress.
But this highlights a profound misunderstanding of how the brain defines rest. In our highly optimized modern culture, we constantly confuse muscular relaxation with cognitive rest.
Oh, that makes sense.
Sitting on a couch, scrolling through a social media feed might feel physically relaxing to your body, but to your brain, you're still pointing a fire hose of novel sensory input directly at your visual cortex.
Your brain is still actively parsing images, reading text, interpreting audio, calculating social cues.
Exactly. And any new sensory input immediately disrupts and halts that 20 times speed neural playback.
It just stops it.
It stops it cold.
Yeah.
The brain simply cannot process a new video and simultaneously pave the complex neural roads for the deep work you just finished. Sensory deprivation is not a luxury. It is a strict biological requirement for memory consolidation.
Wow.
If you deny the brain that quiet, zero-input space, the dirt path never receives this asphalt, and the information you just spent 90 minutes acquiring simply degrades and fades away.
So we could literally be bleeding out half of the knowledge we acquire every single day simply because our immediate reflex is to pull out our phones the second a deep work session or a challenging meeting ends.
The evidence strongly suggests that by seeking constant digital stimulation, we are inadvertently but actively self-sabotaging our own neuroplasticity. We are interrupting the very construction crews we're trying to hire.
Man, to bring all of these microscopic mechanics into a unified picture, the core takeaway from this text is that your brain is far from some decaying, fragile vessel. It's a highly adaptable, dynamically shifting biological masterpiece, and it's waiting for your direct command.
It really is.
By intentionally stepping outside of your comfort zone to trigger the chemistry of frustration, by forcing your hippocampus to navigate physical space without a digital safety net, and by providing your nervous system with the profound, silent rest it requires to physically pave new pathways, you are taking conscious control of your neural architecture.
You're transitioning from being a passive passenger who's merely observing their own cognitive aging process to being the active lead architect of your own mind. You possess the biological capability to build a far more resilient and capable brain at any stage of life.
So, what does this all mean for you tomorrow? I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, one that extends beyond just memorizing facts. We just learned that giving your brain exactly 10 minutes of absolute zero input silence can biologically speed up your learning process by 20 times. It's a mechanism built directly into our DNA.
Yeah.
But if that's true, what other critical areas of our lives are we actively sabotaging by trying to be productive and externally stimulated every single waking second of the day? If the strongest, most resilient expressways in our minds are built exclusively in the silence, what happens to our potential when we never allow ourselves to be quiet?
It's a vital question. It challenges the entire way we structure our days. We highly encourage you to pick just one of these three protocols and experiment with it tomorrow morning. Observe how your biology responds when you change the input.
Let yourself get profoundly frustrated by a novel task, or navigate to a coffee shop without your GPS, or simply let yourself sit in a quiet room for 10 minutes. It might feel strange, but it might also be the most biologically productive thing you do all week. Keep challenging those neural dirt roads and let the construction crew do its job.